What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto got an ANBU Black Ops commander pregnant? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Are there any objections to the team placements? An elderly man with graying hair and a pipe in his mouth asked to the room full of Junin. A few murmurs of disappointment rang out from those few shinobi who didn't get a Genin squad or didn't get the team they wanted, but no one said anything. Very well, you may all go, Sarutobi Hiruzen said as he looked back to the massive piles of paperwork that were always stacked on his desk. The aged Hokage sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Shadow, please come out. Instantly, a form flickered into existence before the man, kneeling with one hand clenched, knuckles on the ground, and the other crossed over the raised knee. Yes, Hokage-sama? The voice, though distorted by the mask, was obviously that of a young male, no older than 10. Take off your mask, you won't need it, the third Hokage said as he shuffled through some papers, mostly requests for a certain blonde to be either exiled or executed. Hokage-sama? The ANBU was clearly confused. I said, take off your mask. The assignment I'm about to give you won't require it. The ANBU slowly, hesitatingly, reached up and removed the mask on his face, which was framed by wild, spiky locks of bright, sun-kissed blonde hair, to reveal the stoic bewhiskered face of one Uzumaki Namikaze Naruto. His deep cerulean eyes glinted with confusion as he looked at his leader. By day, Naruto was a well-known prankster, and the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, as well as the most hated member of the village hidden in the leaves, or Konohagakure. But by night, he was one of the most deadly ninja in Fire Country, the ANBU Shadow. Very few people knew that Naruto was already a shinobi, and even fewer knew he was ANBU. Only 3 actually. The third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, his son Asuma, and the ANBU commander, Dragon. Among the other ANBU it was believed that Shadow was some generic child from a clan, who excelled beyond the level of Uchiha Itachi, because his mask had a permanent solid henge that changed his hair color to a generic Konoha brown. He never spoke, he never interacted beyond hand signals and nods. And he had a reputation for being more bloodthirsty than both Uchiha Madara and Orochimaru combined on the battlefield. Your assignment, Naruto-kun, is to become an academy student and keep an eye on Uchiha Sasuke. After the massacre, he's become a flight risk. I need you to ensure he stays in the village, even if you must beat him within an inch of his life. Hi, Hokage Jiji, Naruto said as he stood and assumed his daytime posture, that of a loud-mouthed prankster who couldn't do a bunshin to save his life. He then handed his mask to the elderly man before him. Does that mean I'll have to act like an idiot all the time and become dead last in the class I'm joining? Hiruzen nodded without looking up at his adopted grandson. Try as they might, the civilian council couldn't stop the Hokage himself from adopting the village pariah. The fact that Konohagakure was legally a military dictatorship didn't hurt either. Naruto sighed heavily and rubbed his temples in a circular motion, trying to ward off the headache that was already forming. It reminded him of when he was adopted into the Sarutobi clan. Flashback. Where are we going, Jiji? A 4-year-old Naruto asked as Hiruzen led him along, holding his hand. The old man chuckled. We're going home, Naruto-kun. But Jiji, my house is on the other side of town, in the opposite way. Naruto was intelligent for his age, a little slow on the uptake, but intelligent. The fact was the boy could be considered a genius. His pranks always went off perfectly, and usually were so multifaceted, that if you saw it coming, you wouldn't see the 4 other parts flying at you. Which proved that the boy could do complex math, incorporating physics as well as human reaction, in his head. Not to mention he was a natural at psychology and reading people. He once made Ibiki Morino spill his greatest secret with one sentence. But because of his well-known status, and his virtually unknown parentage, the civilian council barred him from any kind of schooling, and he was ignored to the point that he almost attempted suicide because he felt so lonely. Not anymore, Naruto-kun. Now, you live with me and my family. Suspicion flashed in the young child's eyes, and his voice took a steel edge, as sharp as any kunai. Jiji, that's a cruel joke. We both know the council won't let me happy. The way he said it, like it was cold, hard, irrefutable fact, broke Hiruzen's heart. They have no say, Naruto-kun. My family has legally adopted you, and anyone who doesn't like it will have to deal with it, he stated softly, looking at the boy, who was slowly beginning to realize that it wasn't a joke. His eyes began to light up before something occurred to him. "Will I have to call you Two-san now?" He sounded genuinely dismayed. Hiruzen chuckled. "No, Naruto-kun, you still call me Gigi. I didn't adopt you, my son Asuma did." He felt left behind by the fact his younger sister, now your Aunt Cassie, is having a child in a few months while he has yet to make any move on his crush. So, he decided to adopt you because he knew you needed a family. "Asuma-sama? You mean Squarebeard?" Naruto asked with a fox-like squint at his Gigi, and the kami of Shinobi had to bust out laughing at the nickname. "Yes, Naruto-kun, Squarebeard is your new Two-san." He managed between his laughter. During the course of the small conversation, they had made it to the Sarutobi compound, and were greeted by a small crowd of people. At the front was a tall man with a thin line of chin hair, which connected his sideburns to his chin with a triangular goatee. He wore a standard Konoha Junin flak jacket, and had a white cloth on his waist, with the kanji for fire. His brown hair was swept back behind his headband. An unlit cigarette hung from his mouth and he leaned against the wall in a relaxed manner, talking to a plain-looking man. On his other side stood a woman of average height, but with a petite build and her stomach heavy with a child. She had long brown hair that reached down to her waist, and was held to the side with a hair clip. A gentle smile graced her face as the man with the cigarette cracked a small joke. Naruto shuffled behind the robe of his Gigi, nervous around so many people, as it usually led to beatings and death threats. Just then, Asuma saw his father and his new son, and his face lit up in a brilliant reassuring smile. "Hey, come on out." With a nudge from the aged Hokage, Naruto shuffled out of hiding and scuffed the ground with his 2 sizes too small sandals. Asuma knelt down and rested his hand on Naruto's head. "It's all okay now, Naru-chan. You're home, Masuko," he said quietly so only the boy could hear him as he moved his hand to his shoulder. Tears sprang up in Naruto's eyes as he finally heard someone call him, "my son," which had been his greatest dream since he could understand he had no family. To be loved, Two-chan. He sobbed out quietly as he lunged into Asuma's arms and began wailing into his shoulder as the man wrapped his arms around the boy in a protective hug. "Shush, it's all right now." The boy sobbed harder and wouldn't stop for another hour. End flashback. Over the past 6 years Naruto had been trained to be shinobi, and risen through the ranks quite quickly. He'd been a chunin at the age of 8, Tokubetsu Jonin at 9, and half a year later been put into the ANBU Black Ops. He'd originally wanted to be Kitsune, Fox, but both Dragon and Hiruzen thought it would be a dead giveaway with his hair, so he was assigned to codename Shadow, the only ANBU to not have an animal mask. And he lived up to his name. He could disappear without a trace in seconds. Asuma chose that moment to walk in without knocking. "Hey Pops, hey Naru. What's going on?" "Gigi just gave me an assignment," Naruto grumbled loudly, crossing his arms for added effect, and stuck his lower lip out in a pout. "Two-chan, can you make him take it back?" he pleaded his dad, breaking out his most vicious weapon. The fox eyes begged no jutsu. Asuma nearly caved right there, without knowing what the mission was. What's the mission?" He managed to get out after looking away from his manipulative son. "I have to go to the academy for 3 years and keep an eye on Sasuke. I'll legally be bumped back to civilian until graduation. And then I'll be a genin. Dad, I'll have to go through all that crap all over again," he shouted loudly, quite aware the Hokage had already activated the privacy seals in the room. Asuma looked at his father. "Really, Pops? Plus I have to intentionally be dead last." Asuma groaned loudly and facepalmed. Unfortunately, that is the only way to ensure that he ends up on the same team as Sasuke, considering Sasuke is Rookie of the Year, and doesn't seem to be anywhere close to losing his position. So, yes, Naruto-kun must play the part of an idiot. Is he at least getting paid for this? S-rank, every month with his allowance, Hiruzen said calmly without looking up from his papers. It was obviously a losing fight. Suddenly Naruto stiffened momentarily before relaxing again. "Gigi, Shimura Danzo is about to enter the tower, presumably to request I be immediately trained by Root again, since he doesn't know I'm already a shinobi. How do you, shadow clones, Gigi?" A look of understanding flashed across Hiruzen's face, then a quick sequence of realization, irritation, and pure loathing. "Baka, baka, baka." each one punctuated by his slamming his face onto the desk while his hands tear at his hair. Both Naruto and Asuma were about to jump forward, fearing the man had gone crazy, but he stood quickly and formed Naruto's favorite hand sign. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. 3 solid clones popped into being, then immediately began in on the paperwork, grumbling slightly. How I never connected the dots on that, I'll never know. The professor, my ancient ass. Asuma gaped at his father, then chuckled slightly. Naruto had a much more extreme reaction. He began rolling on the ground clutching his stomach, laughing so hard it could be heard through the privacy seals. Oh, be quiet, Naruto-kun, snapped his grandfather. Naruto was instantaneously standing at attention, his face completely straight. Good. Now then, seeing as you start school in 3 months, a year late I might add, you must get into the habit of sleeping during the night, and not taking occasional naps during the day. A look of abject horror came over the blonde Jinchuriki's face. He hadn't actually slept in 3 years, not since the night terrors had begun. Oh come on Gigi, I'll be fine, just please don't make me take more than naps. He was on his knees, clawing at the Hokage robes with tears beginning to stream down his face. Why are you so afraid of sleeping Naruto-kun? Pops. Naru has night terrors. If he's asleep longer than 30 minutes, he begins thrashing and screaming. He woke up Konohamaru quite a few times before he started the nap schedule, Asuma explained as he pulled his son from the ground and gave him a fatherly hug while shushing him quietly. While Naruto was a hardened warrior, he was still a child who cried for his daddy. Asuma still didn't know what the terrors were actually about, but he knew they always left Naruto absolutely broken, clinging to him for days on end. He wondered what could make one of the deadliest ninja in Fire Nation cry like a baby and act like a scared 4-year-old again, but then again, he really didn't want to know. Shock registered on Hiruzen's face, and he looked at Naruto, who was cowering behind Asuma, an action so unusual the past few years. It made him realize just how bad the dreams must be. Very well, but you must act like a 10-year-old boy who has had no previous training, understood? Naruto nodded quickly, fully willing to act like a loud-mouthed idiot 24/7 as long as he didn't have to sleep long enough for the dreams to set in. Okay Naruto-kun, go home. You have some adjusting to do. 3 months had passed quickly for Naruto, but conversely they were the longest months of his entire life. Every day dragged on for an eternity, and every week flashed by in a blink. If you don't know the feeling, you have never been to public school. The entire summer had been filled with Naruto trying to adjust to not going out on missions, or standing guard over something every night. To being a normal, 10-year-old boy. The boy was miserable. He had to stay inside the Sarutobi compound at night, because the villagers, ignorant to the fact he could kill them before they could draw breath, still attempted their ritualistic beatings of his person. So he did what any 10-year-old ANBU turned civilian would do during the darker hours, he planned his pranks. And then he sprang them the next day. It would get boring otherwise. But, as Naruto walked to the academy beside his adopted father, he could hear the whisper of the shinobi hopefuls about him. Well, the whispers, and then the ungodly shriek of the ultimate bane of sensitive ears. The pink-haired ban young girl by the name of Haruno Sakura. "Who's that Ino pig?" came the shrill scream, which was apparently supposed to be a whisper. Naruto was in mere moments, rolling on the ground, clutching his ears, a thin trail of blood flowing between his fingers on both sides, screaming in absolute agony. "Oh Kami, make it stop. For the love of the Shinigami, someone make it end," echoed throughout the entire village. Elsewhere in the village, a very cold shiver ran down the spine of one very average-looking woman. Well, average except for one trait, her bright bubble-gum pink hair. "Why do I have a sudden urge to strangle my daughter?" one bemused Haruno Miyobiki asked out loud, to which several of her fellow council members snickered quietly. Back at the academy, "Naru, I think you can let go of your ears now. The prank is over," Asuma sighed as he watched Uzumaki Sarutobi Naruto slowly rise from the ground, wiggling his pinky in his right ear. "What?" he shouted, quite obviously unable to hear for the time being. "The prank is over," Asuma shouted. "What prank? Someone played a prank?" Asuma face-faulted as he realized his son wasn't joking, he really had been affected like that. "Stop shouting you baka," was quickly punctuated by another scream of agony. Asuma stepped over to the perpetrator, and grabbed her face, lifting her effortlessly by her jaw. Either shut up and stop hurting my son, or I swear to Kami-sama, you will never speak again, he growled threateningly as he glowered at the now terrified Banshee. Do I make myself clear? All he got was an enthusiastic nod in response. He let her fall out of his grip as he stepped back to Naruto and helped him. When he got the attention of the boy, he mouthed some words. Okay, good luck, and remember, class moron. Naruto merely nodded and shot a hateful glare at Sakura, who wilted even further. He stalked past and entered the building, leaving everyone else outside. Class didn't start for another 30 minutes anyway. He also managed to notice the obviously very shy girl shadowing him. He cast a discreet glance at her. She stood with her knees together, and her feet pointed inward, indicative of extreme timidness. His short indigo hair was Kutheim style, with 2 bangs framing her face, while the rest barely reached her ears. She wore a beige jacket and matching blue shinobi pants and sandals. Her eyes were a light lavender, and held great gentleness in them. Hyuga Hinata, Naruto thought to himself. He had heard from some of the Hyuga ANBU members her general description, and how she was apparently unfit to be the Hyuga heiress, simply because she was kind and couldn't perform the Jukin properly. She likely doesn't have the same elemental affinity as most Hyuga. The Jukin is made specifically for the earth affinity, and so is rigid and stiff. Considering all I heard about how she can dodge anything effortlessly just by twitching, I guess she has a more flexible body type, likely a fire or water affinity. Naruto shrugged to himself and continued his walk to class. He wasn't there to keep an eye on the Hyuga girl, though he might anyway, so she wasn't really his concern. He just made it to class when the bell rang, initiating the massive stampede of students to get to class. He sat down in a corner desk at the back of the room, where he could see everything, just as 2 girls broke through the door, leaning on each other and glaring fiercely. One was that horrible pink-haired monstrosity from outside, but the other was a blonde, like himself. Long, platinum blonde hair tied into a ponytail, light bluish-green eyes, and unhealthily thin. This must be Yamanaka-sama's daughter Ino. Also not his objective, but interesting nonetheless. One could tell from her half-hearted glare at the bubble, that she wasn't really interested in their competition, but kept it up for appearances. First, they both shouted at the same time. Must these insolent whelps be so loud? I was taking a nap. Kurama, we both know any spawn of that satanic councilwoman is going to be louder and more annoying than a dog whistle. As for the Yamanaka, she wasn't actually all that loud. Her heart doesn't seem to be in this apparent rivalry. Still, the Banshee woke me up, so maybe I could just. No. Kurama, the terrifying Kyuubi no Kitsune, grumbled unhappily for a moment before going quiet. Naruto smirked. Who are you? He was snapped out of his reverie to see a boy about his height, wearing a gray jacket with brown fur around the collar. His short brown hair was messy and wild, and his pupils were slits. This, compounded with his red-fanged tattoos on his cheeks, and the small white ninkin poking its head out of his jacket, and the boy could only be an Inuzuka. Naruto immediately fell into his idiot routine, and grinned fox-like. I'm Uzumaki Sarutobi Naruto. Nice ta mecha. The Inuzuka's face paled considerably and his mouth fell open. Sarutobi? As in the Hokage Sarutobi? A few heads turned at this, including the one person Naruto actually knew in this class, the lazy-assed pineapple. Nara Shikamaru. An enthusiastic nod on Naruto's part ensued. Yeah, he's my Gigi. Oh man, what a drag. Naruto, when did you start at the academy? Came a lazy drawl, followed by the sound of chips crunching. Shika, I didn't know you were in this class. I started today. Dat Bayo. Naruto suddenly froze at the last. Oh, how he hated that verbal tick. Whenever he got excited, which wasn't often nowadays, he would suddenly shout it out, much to the amusement of everyone in the vicinity. He heard from his dad how it was very much like Uzumaki Kushina's databane, which he found odd, considering they shared a verbal tick and a last name, but he left it alone at the request of his Gigi. Munch munch munch, what was that, Shika? Some kind of catchphrase or something? This was said by a fairly heavy boy who was wearing a green overcoat and a scarf around his neck. He had his hair split by a bandana and was eating out of a bag of chips. Naruto's brow crinkled. Akamichi Choji as well? Are all the clan heirs in this class? He cast a quick look around and saw the icing on the cake. a fairly tall boy wearing a large overcoat that covered most of his face and body. His sunglasses glinted slightly and his hair looked a lot like Asuma's. Aburame Shino. It seems the only clan heir our age that isn't here is the Kurama clan heir. Troublesome. It's a verbal tic he has. He can't control it. A few oohs of understanding followed from everyone. You're a year late in joining, Naruto. Yeah, Gigi said he wanted me to wait for some reason, was Naruto's reply before the most horrifying sight ever popped into his vision. The Chunin sensei of the class came in, and seeing all the students talking without seeming to be close to stopping, blew his head up to demonic proportions and screamed at them loudly. Shut up you brats, sit down now. Naruto shuddered at how effective the technique was. He had heard stories of Amino Iruka's demon head jutsu, but always thought it was hogwash. Now he obviously had other views. Holy Kami. That might be as terrifying as Gigi's ki. Now then, class, we have a new student this year. His eyes zeroed in on Naruto, and a minuscule trace of utter loathing appeared in his face, but quickly disappeared, replaced by a professional attitude. Why don't you come up and introduce yourself? Naruto rose, bouncing with excitement, or he appeared to. My name is Uzumaki Sarutobi Naruto Datbeo. I like ramen, and my friend Shikamaru. He always gets me thinking. A few eyes wandered to Shikamaru, who just grumbled quietly and rolled his head in the opposite direction. I don't like when people are mean to others for something beyond their control, and traitors. At this, the Uchiha Saiyan finally looked up at Naruto, his eyes glinting dangerously, as if to say continue that train of thought, I dare you. A smirk formed on Naruto's face. And I hope to one day take the title of Hokage for myself. Datbeo. A snort of laughter from the Inuzuka, and a smaller one from the Uchiha, had Naruto develop a tick mark on his forehead, but before he could say anything, Iruka pushed him in the direction of his seat, admittedly with a little more force than was warranted. Thank you, Naruto. Now class, since this is a class of second years, we'll be diving right into the history of Hai no Kuni. I hope everyone is ready. Naruto almost grimaced. He's acting as though I should know the material that was covered last year. He's good at hiding it, but he sees me as Kurama. Great. Kit, you should pull that prank later today. You don't mean? Yes. Oh please? I want to see the look on his face when it happens. Naruto smiled maliciously, causing everyone in the room to suddenly shiver as though the hand of the Shinigami had passed through them. Deciding to ignore it, Iruka kept teaching. After about 5 minutes, Naruto decided that he'd had enough and chose to begin acting like an idiot. Ugh, he groaned loudly. Boring. Iruka-sensei, can't we do something outside? Iruka opened his mouth, presumably to yell at him, but Naruto cut him off. Well, I plan to go outside. Later, he then jumped to the window, opened it, and bolted through it. He heard a few scuffles and sensed people following him. Get back here you four. Iruka yelled after them. Naruto looked back to see Shikamaru, Choji, and Kiba running right behind him. Kiba laughed loudly, then whooped. Oh man, I like this guy already. Troublesome blondes, Shika said with a smile. Naruto just laughed. Maybe being a genin again with people his age wouldn't be so bad. Several weeks had passed since the first day of school, and Naruto was falling into the role of class moron better than he had expected. He still kept up with himself when no one was around, so he wouldn't actually be as bad as he seemed, but more and more, he felt comfortable with acting like a child. And he had made quick friends with the Akamichi and the Inuzuka, mainly because Shikamaru acted as a go-between of sorts. He dispelled the initial awkwardness that first day. Flashback first day of the academy about an hour after the escape. 3 of the boys to have made a mad dash for freedom looked at each other apprehensively, not really knowing what to say. A loud sigh from Shika, who had laid back as soon as they stopped moving, caught their attention. Troublesome. Naruto, how much do you think you could shovel down in an eating contest? The blonde boy's brow crinkled in confusion. Well I usually leave Gigi crying for his wallet when he buys food. Choji immediately perked up at this. Ah, yes, Naruto thought to himself. The famous Akamichi appetite. Considering their jutsu or caloric-based, the Akamichi take eating very seriously. Evidently all those stories of eating contests leaving restaurants without supplies weren't exaggerated. Suddenly, the usual brashness of the Inuzuka reared its head full force. And you want to be Hokage? Ha, I have a better chance than you do. Naruto snapped his eyes to the boy, irritation evident in them. What he had said to the class hadn't been a lie, he did want to be Hokage. Oh yeah? I bet I could beat you in a spar. Naruto shouted loudly. The Inuzuka smirked. You're on. First spar of the class, I'll get Iruka-sensei to pit us against each other. Flashback end. From there, the group had only become close friends. He consistently beat Choji in eating contests, and he usually just came out on top against Kiba, but only in personal spars. In class or class-related events, he intentionally lost. Today, he was sitting in class, listening to Iruka lecture about how Konohagakure no Sato was founded. After Iruka had all but glued him to his seat, he really had no choice. The man might despise him, but he took his job very seriously. For that, he had Naruto's respect. Naruto flicked his eyes around the classroom, taking in everything with a bored expression. He felt 3 sets of eyes upon him, the Nara heir, the Yamanka heiress, and the Hyuga heiress. Shikamaru, he knew, was analyzing him because of the discrepancies between his actions while alone with friends and those while in class. The Hyuga, he noticed, was casting sidelong glances at him, then blushing. So he had an admirer. He would have to let her down gently, as he knew her father would never let her be with him. Hiyoshi's reason for this was much more sensible than the villagers'. Naruto's reputation as a notorious prankster cast him in a bad light, and relations with someone who showed no signs of remorse for being a delinquent would look bad for the Hyuga as a whole. He never seemed to look at Naruto with disdain for the Kyuubi when they crossed paths, he merely seemed wary of the boy's pranks. The Yamanaka girl was harder to get a read on, though. She seemed utterly devoid of emotion when gazing at him, as though analyzing him, but at the same time, whenever he looked at her, she looked away quickly, unlike Shika, who kept his gaze steady, as though fearful of being caught staring at a boy other than her crush. He looked at her out of the corner of his eye, and saw her frowning slightly while looking at him, and nudging the bubblegum girl, whom he had learned was named Sakura, with a few whispered words. Despite the fact that she was whispering so quietly it appeared Sakura could barely hear her, despite being less than a foot from her, Naruto heard her clearly thanks to his enhanced hearing, a gift from Kurama when they first met. Hey, forehead, is it just me, or does something seem off about that Naruto kid? He's obviously an idiot, but he's always trying to hang out with Sasuke-kun. Almost like he's watching him. Naruto grimaced. While it seemed he was found out, he knew it was just idle speculation by a member of a clan full of mental specialists. He spent just as much time trying to be friends with the Uchiha as with everyone else. Right at that moment, Iruka called a break for lunch, and Naruto was the first one outside, stretching his arms in the sun and groaning happily. He much preferred being outside in the sun than inside in the air conditioning. Kiba soon followed him, along with Choji, who was dragging Shikamaru. The rest of the class trickled out slowly. He turned to the door and saw Sakura step out. She saw him and a look of fear flashed across her face, then she hightailed it to the opposite end of the lunchyard. Naruto shrugged and looked around for someplace to sit. He noticed a mane of black duck ass sitting alone under a tree, eating out of a bento. A small frown graced his features as he watched Sasuke. That lonely look in his eye. He's a lot like me before 2chan adopted me, and even though I'm mostly alone. He walked over, his own bento still in the bag, and sat down next to the Uchiha silently, then began eating. Sasuke looked at him sideways, a small glare in his eyes. What do you want, Dobi? Go away. Naruto merely kept eating. Sasuke turned to face him fully, his normally stoic and uninterested face full of anger. I said go away. No one should be lonely, Sasuke. That is the path of a traitor, Naruto said quietly. He felt the Uchiha stiffen. Dobi, I saw the look in your eyes, Sasuke. It was the same as mine, before I was adopted. You're adopted? For once, the face of the last Uchiha showed something other than boredom or contempt. Naruto nodded. I suppose you have it slightly worse off on that front, seeing as I never knew my parents in the first place, whereas you had love for the first part of your life. All I have ever known was loneliness and the contempt of the villagers, who either refused to acknowledge me or beat me up. But when 2chan adopted me, I finally had someone who cared about me. I shuddered to think what would have happened if that hadn't happened. I don't want to see you go down that road either. Sasuke remained quiet for a moment, before a small genuine smile graced his lips. I suppose it wouldn't be too bad to have one friend. As long as it's not one of those fangirls, he finally said with a small shudder. Naruto chuckled. No worries, I won't swoon over you. You're not my type. Sasuke smirked at the joke, then turned and kept eating. Naruto finished his lunch as well. As they rose to return to class, Naruto could feel the glares of every girl but one directed at his back as he walked and joked with the Uchiha, who surprisingly had a personality. That one girl's glare was directed at Sasuke, who seemed to either not notice or not care. They walked into the academy together, acting like they'd been friends forever. Naruto was wearing his best shit-eating grin and looking at Iruka smugly. Iruka, however, looked like a blood vessel was about to pop in his forehead as he glared at the demon brat, while they stood in front of the Hokage. Naruto-kun, would you care to explain? Hiruzen looked like he was barely restraining his laughter. I finally convinced Sasuke to join me in setting off a prank, and he suggested this. He snickered. Said Uchiha was standing on the other side of him, hands in his pockets, trying his absolute best to not die laughing whenever he looked at Iruka. Amino Iruka was covered head to toe in many different colors of paint, baking powder, tar and feathers, and even some cow manure. Sasuke suggested this? The third Hokage looked a little skeptical. Well, Gigi. He suggested the paint, but that's small thinking. I might have tweaked his plan a bit. At this Hiruzen chuckled heartily as Sasuke snickered quietly. In the 3 months since Naruto had approached Sasuke at lunch, the two had become very good friends. Sasuke had even started hanging out with Naruto's other friends, much to his fangirl's dismay. And how exactly did 2 academy students pull off this sort of thing on a Chunin? Iruka grumbled under his breath. Flashback earlier that day. Iruka walked into the classroom slowly, looking at a note on his clipboard and talking to Mizuki. He glanced up momentarily to see Naruto, Sasuke, and their friends sitting quietly. Alarm bells immediately went off in Iruka's head at this. He broke out in a cold sweat. Iruka, what's wrong? Naruto is sitting quietly. Mizuki went pale and snapped his gaze to the blonde, who suddenly smiled and did a half-ram seal. Before they could react, Iruka and Mizuki were confined in a small barrier that glowed green. Well, Iruka-sensei, it seems you're a little caught up this morning, Naruto quipped, causing his friends to laugh. Naruto-san, it is illogical to confine our teachers, because they have to teach us, called out Aburame Shino from the back of the class. Naruto flapped his hand dismissively. Class is cancelled today, Shino. Small, HMMS, echoed around the room. Instead, we have art class, Naruto added with a devilish smirk. Moments later, anguished cries echoed throughout the village. More than a few people said prayers for whomever had been taken. Flashback end. So you used a level 3 seal to confine your teachers, then had the class help you cover them in various substances. I had to ask, Naruto-kun, where did you learn a level 3 barrier seal? Hiruzen questioned. Naruto shrugged nonchalantly. 2-chan started teaching me seals last week. He jumped right through levels 1 and 2 when I basically blew through them. He said he can only teach me up to level 3 though. That's because he himself only knows up to level 3. As it is with any shinobi who learns seals but doesn't become a seal master. Damn, I was starting to like Fuinjutsu too. A loud whop followed by a whine and Naruto holding his head brought attention back to Iruka. Can we get back to the topic on hand? Iruka-kun, I would appreciate it if you didn't hit my grandson. Iruka grimaced but bowed slightly. Now then, obviously I cannot let this go unpunished, Naruto-kun. And since Sasuke was a major player in this prank, he too must be punished. Hi, Hokage-sama, I accept the consequences of my actions, though I don't regret doing it, Sasuke said. Naruto chuckled and it occurred to him, had this not happened, Sasuke might have a mentality of, I am an Uchiha, you can't do anything to me. Evidently this also occurred to Sasuke, as he shuddered slightly and leaned towards his friend. Why do I get the feeling I almost became a pompous ass with a superiority complex, he whispered. Maybe because you would have, came the snarky reply. Both boys shuddered slightly. Now then, as punishment, you two must spend the remainder of the day with Iruka-kun, and help him in whatever way he needs, within reason, he said pointedly to Iruka, who had almost immediately begun formulating ways to get Naruto injured. He then sighed dejectedly. 3 small salutes and cries of, yes, Hokage-sama, Gigi. followed before they all turned to leave. Naruto-kun, please stay a moment longer. Naruto stopped and turned as Sasuke and Iruka stepped out, both curious. Once the door closed and the privacy seals were activated, Hiruzen sighed and pinched his nose. Naruto-kun, I thought I asked you to ensure Sasuke Uchiha remains loyal to Konoha, not turn him into a delinquent. Gigi, by being his friend, and by having him develop more friendships, I'm ensuring he remains loyal. You're the one who taught me kindness and understanding are the path to peace. Plus, he even admitted that while he still wants to avenge his clan, he's more focused on not betraying his new friends to do it. Hiruzen jerked back in slight surprise before he smiled. Then I must commend you. Although I have noticed his grades dipping slightly lately. He doesn't spend so much time studying anymore. He's spending more and more time with Kiba, Choji, Shika and me. A small ah ensued. Alright then, you may go, the Sandaime said as he waved his hand and turned back to the paperwork he and his shadow clones were working on. Naruto smiled, waved, and left. He found Sasuke and Iruka waiting outside the tower. Let's go you brats. I need to go home and shower, then I have errands to run, Iruka said irritably, with a glare at Naruto, but only mild annoyance toward Sasuke. Both boys noted this, but only Sasuke was confused by it. They walked in silence through the village, until they reached an apartment complex very close to Naruto's old one. Once they got inside, Iruka harshly telling them to sit on the couch and not touch anything, he went to take a shower. Naruto, being who he was, got up and looked around the room. He saw several pictures of a younger-looking Iruka with a civilian man and a kunoichi. He bore a strong resemblance to the kunoichi, but had the civilian's hair color. Are these Iruka-sensei's parents? They must be. He doesn't have any siblings as far as I know, and he never mentions anything about any friends, like Mizuki-sensei does. I wonder what happened to them. Sasuke said after joining Naruto at a picture of Iruka riding on the man's shoulders while the kunoichi smiled gently. They died in the Kyuubi attack, came a sad voice behind them. They turned to see Iruka toweling his hair wearing only pants. My mother was in the same graduating class as the Yondaime, she was kunoichi of the year. My father, well he was a stand-up comedian. They met at one of his shows. Oh, I'm sorry about your parents sensei. If it makes you feel any better at all, I was told my parents were killed during the Kyuubi attack too. But I never knew them. Naruto looked at the picture again sadly. I guess it hurts more to lose the ones you love than to have never known them in the first place. Iruka looked at Naruto for a moment, confusion written on his face, before his features softened slightly. No. If you knew your parents and lost them, you can at least remember the good times you've had with them. If you never knew them at all, and have only known misery, then you have nothing to look back on. Sometimes it's easy to lose sight of what others have lost when you're so focused on your own pain. Naruto looked at him sideways, then nodded imperceptibly, letting Iruka know his apology was accepted. You know what, boys? My errands aren't that important anyway. Have you two eaten? Both Sasuke and Naruto shook their heads. Not since breakfast, Sasuke said. Iruka smiled. Why don't I buy you two lunch? Where do you want to go? Sasuke's eyes widened and he cast a fearful glance at his friend, before trying to subtly let his sensei know that was a bad idea. Naruto was too fast though. To Ichiraku ramen, and suddenly, both Sasuke and Iruka were fluttering along behind the blonde, who had a death grip on their wrists, like paper flags as the boy ran straight through the streets, plowing through anyone in his way, to the Ichiraku ramen stand about 3 streets away from the Hokage Tower. In the Hokage's office a few minutes prior, the Sandaime Hokage, for no discernible reason to anyone, including himself, suddenly began laughing hysterically, with a feeling as though many thousands of ryo had stopped screaming in terror in his wallet. When his secretary peeked into the room fearfully, he began laughing harder. Hokage-sama. What's so funny? I don't know, he gasped out. After a few moments, he calmed down enough to talk normally. Oh, I get the feeling Iruka-kun is going to hate Naruto-kun for another reason altogether after today. To Ichiraku ramen, came a loud cry from the open window. Hiruzen froze momentarily, before breaking down laughing again, clutching his stomach and falling out of his chair. Now he knew why Iruka would hate Naruto. Inside Ichiraku ramen, old man, 30 miso with extra pork. Iruka and Sasuke were suddenly not flapping in the wind, but were instead seated at the bar of a ramen stand. Coming right up, Naruto. The usual, Sasuke? Please, came the side reply. And for you, sir? It took Iruka a moment to realize the question was directed at him. Oh, one shrimp please. A nod from the elderly man behind the counter was all the confirmation he got. He never noticed the devilish smirk on Tsuchi Ichiraku's face. Obviously he was missing something. A loud squeal was heard, before a white and brown blur shot over the bar and glomped Naruto. The blur resolved itself into a pretty girl with light brown hair and a white ramen cook outfit on, including a white bandana in her hair. Ayame nay, get off. I was here yesterday. Oh, I can't help it, Naruto-kun. You're just too adorable. The girl replied as she squished the young blonde in a hug, his face pressed into her growing cleavage. She only finally let him go when Naruto's order was placed on the bar. Iruka paled at the sight and felt his wallet cry out in terror and grow considerably lighter. He was even more horrified when Naruto began tearing into the ramen at a pace that made the Hiraishin seem slow, as though he had not just been nearly suffocated. Sasuke, by comparison, was calmly eating his one pork ramen. Iruka barely registered beginning his own food as he watched Naruto finish the final bowl and order 30 beef ramen with extra chicken. How the hell can you eat so much ramen? Iruka asked fearfully. Naruto was too busy scarfing down his food to answer. Naruto is a ramen addict. Much like Mitarashi Anko is a dango addict, Sasuke said calmly, finishing his bowl. Iruka, who had been teamed up with Anko when she was a chunin, nearly fainted. He'd had to pitch in for a team meal after that mission, and Anko had eaten so much dango, the store had run out. Naruto, slow down. You know what happened last time. And I'm pretty sure you don't want a repeat of the great ramen shortage, as your two-san called it, Sasuke said to Naruto, who had just finished his last bowl. Meh, I'll be fine. I'm stopping for today anyway. Oba-chan would strangle me if I ruined my appetite before dinner tonight. I might love ramen more than life itself, but I do know moderation, Sasuke. A small snirk of laughter came from the raven-haired boy. Iruka sighed and turned to the bar, about to ask for some sort of discount or something, only to be presented with the bill by a smiling Ayame. He took one glance at it, before going white and falling over, clutching his chest. Naruto and Sasuke looked on in mild amusement. Just wait until when you don't stop yourself, Sasuke said with a straight face. I'll bring the popcorn, Naruto responded. Ayame and Tsuchi laughed heartily as Iruka slowly, never leaving the ground, reached into his wallet and pulled out the money to pay the bill. It was gone before he got it above the counter, being counted by Ayame. His hand flopped back down to his stomach. His eyes were swirls, his skin was whiter than a sheet, and it looked as though his heart had stopped beating. Naruto leaned over him with a foxy grin plastered on his face. See you tomorrow in class, Iruka-sensei. Then, he and Sasuke bolted from the stand, running full out, laughing hysterically. Iruka shot up, rage on his face, and he blasted after them. Get back here you brats. Naruto was inside the training hall of the Sarutobi compound, going through some katas with his tanto. He might be a civilian, but he was still an ANBU level ninja. If he let himself fall complacent, then he would grow weaker, and get killed in the field. That would be counterproductive to his purposes. So, he trained. He fluidly shifted from one stance to the next, his eyes closed, as he learned to manipulate his nature chakra to tell him his surroundings. Having a strong wind affinity had advantages, one being that he could vibrate the air around him to act as a sort of echolocation. For this reason, he noticed when the door slid open and a small group of people entered. He froze in shock and snapped his eyes open. Sasuke, Choji, Kiba, Shikamaru, and Iruka were in the training room, looking at him with confusion as he held his tanto horizontally. Naruto began to sweat lightly from the nerves. Naruto, why do you have a tanto? Iruka asked. Naruto stayed mute, having not expected this visit, considering what day it was. October 10th, Naruto's birthday. He always stayed in on this day, or went on a mission, because if he went out in public, people started to riot. The Kyuubi festival always ensured people were drunk, and drunks tended to be more violent with what they perceived as the Kyuubi reincarnated. It was a gift from Gigi a few years ago. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Shikamaru looked skeptical. Choji nodded, Iruka frowned slightly, Kiba cocked his head, Akamaru did the same, and Sasuke crossed his arms. Sasuke finally said something. "Happy birthday, Naruto." Naruto, who had turned around to put away his tanto, froze. He heard a few steps, and a small smack, then a grunt from Sasuke. "Sasuke," Iruka said to the boy. "I thought we weren't going to breach the subject. Hokage-sama told us it was a sensitive subject for him. I felt he needed to hear it. He's my best friend, sensei. I'm not going to ignore his birthday." Naruto started shaking slightly, and he felt Sasuke walk up behind him and place a hand on his shoulder. "Naruto, happy birthday. I couldn't get you much, but here you go." Sasuke's hand came around the side to reveal a limited edition ramen cup with a bow on it. Naruto felt tears sliding silently down his cheeks as he shakily took the gift. The first he had ever gotten on his birthday. He never told Asuma his birthday, and the Hokage was always busy. "Thank you," he whispered. Sasuke patted his arm softly. "Why don't you put your stuff away and we can hang out?" Naruto nodded and did just that. While he was out of the dojo, he wiped his eyes free of tears. When he returned, he found Asuma standing with his friends, looking stern. "Naru, why didn't you ever tell me what your birthday was?" "I didn't think it was a big deal. The most I've ever gotten for my birthday was beatings." "Well, right before you adopted me, I did get this anonymously," he said as he pulled out his renowned Gama-chan. His toad-themed wallet was about half full of ryo. Iruka quickly turned the subject back to his original question. "Naruto, why do you have a tanto? You handle it too well for an academy student with no previous training." Asuma and Naruto both started sweating, seeing Iruka's no-nonsense look. A look shot between them, and they seemed to hold a silent conversation. After several moments, Naruto sighed dejectedly. The Hokage chose that moment to walk in smiling. It quickly fell from his face. "What's wrong, Naruto-kun?" He pointed at his friends and sensei, "got in while I was training. They saw my tanto." The Hokage sighed explosively and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Go get it. No point in hiding it now, from them at least." A quick salute and a shunshin later had Naruto reappear in the dojo with a mask in his hand. His friends were amazed that he could do the shunshin no jutsu, while Iruka was sweating at the implications of the pattern of the mask he saw in Naruto's hand. His fears were confirmed when Naruto donned the mask, and his hair changed from bright golden blonde to a more average brown color akin to Kiba's. The mask itself had black swirls on a white background, spreading from the right side to the left. The mask was almost completely flat, and showed no design other than the swirls. "Shadow-san," Iruka said just loud enough to be heard. Naruto nodded and touched a tattoo on his shoulder, instantly wearing his old ANBU uniform, his second tanto strapped to his shoulder. Iruka quickly thought of all the times he had tried to be mean and vicious to Naruto and gulped audibly. He paled and sat down, near to hyperventilating. "Shadow," Shika said thoughtfully. "My dad mentioned a shadow outside of our clan jutsu. I think he said something about an ANBU." He snapped his gaze to Shadow, along with the other boys. Sasuke's mouth dropped open in shock, and Choji dropped his bag of chips. Naruto dipped his head slightly and stood at a parade rest, his legs shoulder-width apart and his hands clasped right above his butt. "Naruto-kun, I think that will be fine. You can remove the mask now." Shadow nodded and reached up, removing his mask and placing it on his hair, which had changed back to its bright yellow color. "I was an ANBU Black Ops member before Gigi sent me to the academy. He felt I needed to take a break from the life of a shinobi, and socialize with kids my own age." A straight-up lie, but if Sasuke knew that their friendship had been based on a mission, he might turn against the village. "So I was officially demoted to academy student and told to tell no one." Iruka curled into the fetal position and rocked back and forth, sucking his thumb. Shikamaru rubbed his head, obviously finally figuring out why the blonde seemed better at shinobi skills when outside of class. Kiba's face faltered and groaned loudly. Choji simply shrugged and kept eating. Sasuke looked lost for a few moments, then apparently decided something, and he smirked. "Looks like I have a lot of catching up to do, huh, Naruto?" Naruto merely nodded and smiled. "That you do, Sasuke." And Iruka-sensei, the Chunin looked up from his breakdown and focused on the boy. I would appreciate if you graded me on how I performed during class, not on what you know. I chose to be the dead last so people wouldn't really focus on me, seeing me as not a threat. Iruka nodded dumbly, then went back to his rocking. Naruto touched his ANBU tattoo again, changing back to his outfit of a gray zip-up hoodie, dark orange shorts, and a pair of blue shinobi sandals. Then he handed the mask to Hiruzen, who stowed it away. Now that you all know that little bit, I must ask you to keep it a secret. It was not common knowledge that Naruto-kun was even a shinobi, let alone an ANBU. The boys nodded, Shika a bit owly, and Iruka made an affirming whimper. So, this whole time, you were closer to being Hokage than I would even hope to be for the next 8 years? Kiba asked sullenly. Naruto chuckled and nodded. Kiba cried anime tears while Akamaru barked in laughter. Why don't we go get Naru some cake and ramen for his birthday? Asuma piped up. Everyone quickly nodded, Iruka coming out of his near catatonic state. Naruto's eyes widened before he shuffled his feet and looked at the ground. That might not be a good idea. Why not? Sasuke asked. The villagers don't really like me, so they get mad if I come out during the Kyuubi festival. Naru, I doubt they'll do anything with the Hokage, and an elite Junin, along with a Chunin, and their beloved Uchiha-sama accompanying you, Asuma said with a chuckle. Sasuke frowned, but even he couldn't deny that's what he was viewed as. Little by little, the group managed to coax Naruto out of the compound, with promises of massive amounts of ramen, threats of grounding, and pleas of friendship. As soon as he was outside the walls, he bolted for the Ichiraku stand, taking the rooftops to avoid the villagers. When he got there, he sat in the corner least visible, and waited for the rest of the group, most of whom were smiling in amusement or frowning in concern when they walked in. Naruto ordered a mere 2 bowls of shrimp with miso, shocking everyone. Naruto, what's wrong? You aren't hungry? Tucci sounded genuinely concerned. Naruto mumbled something into his bowl, before Ayame bopped him on the head with a ladle. Birthday boy, stop being gloomy and eat your ramen. If you don't, you get no cake. Naruto's eyes shot up to see her smiling and holding out more ramen. He smiled softly. The ramen was gone in moments. Naruto yawned loudly as his head drooped from his hand, jolting him awake momentarily. Mizuki is even more boring in lectures than Iruka-sensei. Iruka had fallen ill the past few days, so Mizuki, the whitish blue-haired Chunin assistant teacher, had been filling in. But he proved so boring, even the most studious of pupils had started to nod off. The entire class was currently either completely asleep, or on the way there. Mizuki didn't notice because he was facing the blackboard, practically doodling because his writing was so terrible. There's still 2.5 hours before class is released. Naruto. Don't fall. Zzzzzzzzz. Naruto's head finally snapped down from his supporting hand, ramming into the table with the force of gravity, but he was dead asleep. The 7 months of having to get up early for the academy, combined with the fact he only took naps every now and then, and Naruto had become increasingly drowsy and unable to do anything. He snoozed peacefully, with Sasuke drooping off, but doing his best to stay awake, right next to him. Even the ever-logical Shino, who had never once disrupted class or fallen asleep, was snoring gently, his hive buzzing in time with his exhales. The silence was broken after 30 minutes, when Naruto entered REM sleep, his mind going into overdrive in his dreams. No. Stay away from me. A loud scream ripped through the classroom, jolting everyone awake, and causing Mizuki to turn around. Everyone looked to the blonde to see him thrashing violently, screaming bloody murder, tears so obviously glistening on his cheeks. No, please, no AARRRRRGGHHHH. Sasuke tried shaking him awake, only for a hand to flail about and smack him in the face. As time slowly progressed, Naruto's thrashing became ever more violent, his screams louder and more anguished. At some point, Mizuki had moved everyone out of range of his motions, which had increased to the point he fell out of his chair and was on the floor. Just as the teacher was about to call for the Hokage, Naruto curled into a ball and whimpered piteously. Sasuke stepped forward cautiously and gingerly laid a hand on Naruto's side, only for the boy to flinch violently and resume thrashing and screaming. He got so loud, the teachers down the hall shouted at Mizuki to keep quiet. What's wrong with him? Ino shouted, covering her ears. troublesome. I think he's having night terrors." Shikamaru looked both worried for his friend, and angry at him for disturbing his sleep. At that precise moment, Naruto let out a wordless scream so blood-curdling and loud, if they hadn't been covering their ears, the class would all be permanently deaf. The scream echoed throughout the village, thanks to the acoustics of the location of the academy, and the older generations all felt a chill down their spines. More than a few ducked under or behind something, cowering in fear. At the village gate, checkout station. What the fuck was that? Katetsu looked terrified. It sounded like the Kyuubi. Azuma looked even more scared than his partner. The eternal Chunins turned to the only Junin in sight, the team leader of the mission that had just returned. A cigarette fell to the ground and soft brown eyes widened in alarm. Naruto. Asuma sprinted off without another word. Worry etched into his face as he bolted and barreled through anyone in his way, civilian and shinobi alike. He only stopped when he heard one merchant, whom he had never cared for, because of how he treated Naruto, said something loudly. Shakily, but loudly. "Looks like that fucking demon finally showed its true colors. And near our children? The Hokage will be put on trial for this." The temperature in the immediate area dropped 30 degrees in a matter of seconds, and everyone cowered in fear. All the civilians turned to see Sarutobi Asuma, elite Junin of Konohagakure no Sato, son of the third Hokage, and adopted father to Naruto Uzumaki, glaring at the man with pure hatred, his trench knives gripped tightly in his hands. He stalked over to the fat Slav who had spoken and slammed his right blade into the man's shoulder. The man, term used loosely, opened his mouth to scream, but found the other blade held to his throat. "That 11-year-old boy is my son. And you just committed an act of willful treason, you scum-sucking shitbag." The face on the jelly donut paled from both fear and from minor blood loss. "Now since I have somewhere to be, I will leave you in the care of Borsan, who will kindly escort you to the ANBU T&I department. I suspect Morino Ibiki would like a new toy." Instantly a boar-masked ANBU appeared, his arms crossed, and nodded, taking hold of the fat blob who had once been an influential merchant. Asuma ripped his trench knife out viciously and sprinted away once more, heading with all possible speed to the academy. He didn't notice an off-duty kunoichi nearby, who watched the whole thing. Blood-red eyes watched the retreating form of the man hungrily. Who knew Asuma-kun could be so hot when he's protective? Hokage Tower. When the scream ripped through, Hiruzen shot up from his chair, alarm on his face. He knew that scream. He had watched Naruto fall asleep a few months ago, and hadn't woken him up in time. He bolted for the door, robes flying and hat falling to the ground. He couldn't care less. His grandson was in pain. He pushed right through Danzo, who had been about to knock, without a word, sprinting for all he was worth to the academy. About a block from the door, he met up with Asuma. The two sprinted together wordlessly, literally kicking the doors open to save time. When they got to the class they knew Naruto was in, they blasted through the door to see the blonde thrashing on the floor, more specifically on the steps between desks, and screaming hysterically. Asuma shot straight to him, pushing through the students in his way, who were treating it like some kind of sick show. Hiruzen looked around to take stock. Most of the children in the room had fear written on their faces, and Mizuki was torn between utter loathing and total glee. Hiruzen scowled, but couldn't do anything about it. Asuma, who was kneeling next to his son, was trying his best to avoid getting hit by the flailing limbs. "Naruto, calm down. I want my Tou-chan. Stay away from me." Asuma reached out and grabbed Naruto as best he could and lifted him into his arms. He rocked gently and began stroking the blonde's hair softly. He chanted an old nursery rhyme under his breath. Little by little, Naruto calmed down, but he still whimpered piteously and mewled in fear. "Tu-chan," he cried into his dreams. "Don't leave me." Asuma felt his heart break. Now he knew at least part of what Naruto was so terrified of. The boy curled into a ball in his arms and turned into his chest, crying freely and whimpering in fear. When he felt Naruto was okay, he shook him, trying to wake him up. He succeeded. The sea blue eyes snapped open, and before Asuma could react, one of his trench knives was pressed to his throat, the point up under his chin, ready to be plunged through his brain, before the cerulean orbs seemed to recognize him. "Tu-chan." He dropped the knife into his dad's lap and threw his arms around the bigger man's shoulders. His tears felt hot on Asuma's neck, but he didn't mind. He rubbed Naruto's back soothingly. Hiruzen, meanwhile, was frantically checking to see if anyone who didn't know Naruto's secret had seen the quick movements after his eyes had snapped open. He felt assured no one had, and sighed quietly. Not one person noticed two sets of eyes widening in amazement. Soft lavender and seafoam green. Naruto was pacing his room, wringing in his hands an old piece of cloth. His younger cousin, Konohamaru, was sitting on the bed coloring and swinging his legs while happily humming. The reason for Naruto's nervous actions was simple. Kurama had told him his secret was known to those outside his friends. Neither knew who or how, but someone knew he was an ANBU-level shinobi, or at least strongly suspected. Hiruzen had noticed that his non-biological grandson was agitated, which usually spelled utter chaos for the household, and sometimes the whole village, and so wisely, with great decorum and grace expected of the Hokage, fled in terror to the Hokage tower, not even bothering to make sorry excuses. When Asuma came back from a small mission, seeing his father cowering slightly behind his desk, and asked why, his answer was a very nervous, "Naruto has been restless these past few days since the school incident." His reaction was quite dignified, as was his father's. He screamed shrilly and bolted to the opposite end of the village, presumably to either his Junin apartment he never used, or to that of either Mito Gai or Hitaki Kakashi, his two friends from the academy and fellow Junins. For several days after, the three of them, in addition to several other shinobi and kunoichi they frequently dealt with in a friendly light, were tense, jumpy, and at times downright terrified for no discernible reason. But to any who knew the group, no larger than 15 people in total, excluding the 4 academy students Naruto called friends, the reason was actually quite obvious. When Naruto got agitated, bad things happened. Sometimes he would do massive amounts of pranks to help focus his mind and work through his issues. Other times, he would request missions that would normally kill him were he not a coiled ball of deadly energy. But when he paced, it meant something worse was happening. Much worse. Pacing meant his issues were so big he couldn't vent the energy necessary, and usually led to him being volatile, snappish, and very, very cruel. Also, he tended to leak the Kyuubi's chakra, but who cares about that? The only person who was totally safe from his violent nature at these times was Konohamaru, his beloved cousin, as close as a brother as he could find. He even scared Asuma, who usually was very relaxed but stern. "Kit, stop pacing. You're making me nervous." Kurama yawned lazily. "You should be nervous, Fleabag. If someone knows, they might slip or try to blackmail me. If it gets out I'll be crucified." Naruto snarled in his mind. He felt Kurama wilt, both cowed and a little scared. He didn't want to die after all. Just relax a moment, kid. Breathe, calm down, and think of something else for a little bit. The instructions were familiar to Naruto. Whenever he began to lose his temper or be bothered by something, Kurama would tell him this and help him meditate. His mind fell immediately to the day he met the demon fox. The day he became an ANBU. Flashback. Naruto was bouncing excitedly on his heels as he stood before the Kami no Shinobi. Sarutobi Hiruzen was smiling slightly as he looked at the 4 young people before him. 2 shinobi and 2 kunoichi were standing before their leader. All showed remarkable skills in their respective fields, with the blonde being what was called a utility ninja, meaning he could fill almost any role he was needed in. From the far right, by Hiruzen's view, stood a ponytailed raven-haired genjutsu master, his stoic face showing near to no emotion. A red head with her hair down in a short bob around her ears was next, her body decked in different weapons and storage scrolls. Her eyes gleamed with minor mischief. Next was a young woman with long brown hair, in a low, short ponytail and with red triangles on her face. Utter despair was etched into her being, evidence to any who knew her clan that she had lost her partner. Her fingers idly twitched through various half-seals. Finally stood the blonde, a full head shorter than the rest. "Congratulations, you 4. You show unique promise, and so have been recruited into the ANBU Black Ops." 4 small bows interrupted him, but he didn't mind. He reached back onto the desk and lifted the first mask. It was shaped and styled into the face of a weasel, with dusky red accents. He held it out to the raven-haired young man, who took it gently, almost reverently. "Uchiha Itachi, from this day, you no longer exist as you. From now, you are Weasel, the slippery one, able to distract his foe and leave without hindrance." Itachi bowed low and donned the mask, falling into the ANBU crouch. Hiruzen moved forward, grabbing the next mask. Akamichi Saraku, from this day, you no longer exist as you. From now, you are Bear, the fierce one, always head first into the fight and covering her comrades. The girl squeaked happily and donned the mask, also falling into the ANBU-ready crouch. Hiruzen moved. Inazuka Nozomi, from this day, you no longer exist as you. From now, you are Wolf, the protector. Always watching the night for danger, and always alert. Nozomi grunted and donned the mask, falling listlessly to the crouch as the other two had done. She had never fully recovered from the pain of losing her Ninken 3 years ago, and it showed. Hiruzen hesitated a moment before he stepped in front of a grinning Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. You are a special case, the boy's face fell. From today you no longer exist, as any living form. Itachi made a confused sound and Naruto looked puzzled. From now, you are Shadow, the death. Always unseen, never heard, and untraceable. You are the first and only ANBU to not be alive, and we hope to see you prosper in your name. He held out the final mask, which was almost totally black. The background was white, but was overlaid with black swirls and shapes, shadows, and was completely flat. When he placed the mask on his face, feeling the seal adhere to his flesh until he desired it removed, he heard Weasel and Bear gasp. When he shot them questioning glances, Weasel pointed at his hair. Hiruzen held up a small hand mirror. Shadow's hair was no longer sun blonde. It was now a muted brown, similar to Wolf's. But it caught his attention because it surprised Weasel, who was a genjutsu expert. Hokage-sama, if I may? A nod. This is not a genjutsu, is it? No, came a distorted voice, and out of the darkness stepped Ryu, Dragon, the ANBU commander and second most powerful shinobi in Konohagakure. All 4 of the newly minted ANBUs snapped to salute as he continued. We took the idea of your solid henge, Shadow, and applied it to your mask. Your hair really changes while you have it on. But why? Came the question, which earned the boy a sharp elbow in the ribs from Wolf. Wolf, it's okay, Ryu said with a smirk in his voice. If you just took everything at face value and questioned nothing, you wouldn't be ANBU. I prefer if you get all the knowledge you can to just rolling with it. Shadow, Hokage-sama felt that with your unique hair, your identity would be found out the instant you were seen. But what about Neko-senpai? And Inu-senpai? They have unusual hair as well. Indeed, Ryu chuckled. And they had the same thing done when they first joined the Black Ops. Over time, enemies dispelled the genjutsu we had at that time, and we have been unable to restore it. Shadow nodded in acceptance, but resolved to ask Inu, who he knew was Kakashi, his Tusan's friend, about it. Now, said the Hokage cheerily, dropping the privacy seals with a clap, you 4 are a squad and will be working with each other extensively. Your first mission is an S-rank hunt and kill. We have a rank shinobi somewhere in Hai no Kuni. Find and kill them, then bring in their heads. I trust you are all packed already? All 4 ANBU held out storage scrolls and said, simultaneously, Hi, Hokage-sama. Then go. At that, the 4 shunshined away and met at the front gate. So who's squad leader? Asked Wolf. Inu-senpai, Shadow answered immediately. The 3 others jerked back and looked at him. Why? Because he's a man? Bear almost shouted. No, Shadow said curtly. Because he's the most level-headed and the least likely to have his rush-off half-cocked with some pitiful plan like, hit them really hard, really fast. In addition, he knows our capabilities best, as he was on a Genin squad with you 2 and Chunin with me. You 2 only know me by reputation. He actually knows me. With all of that together, Weasel is best suited to being squad leader. The others were silent a moment before Weasel chuckled. With that logic, Shadow, I have no choice but to accept. But my one condition is that you are second in command, seeing as despite your exuberance you house a keen mind and logical thinking, even if your temper flares often. Shadow nodded. Now, Weasel continued, growing somber once more, Shadow, create about 10 cage buncheons and set them out to scout the countryside. We 4 will scout to the north and wait for one to dispel, or for us to find them ourselves. Instantly, with no seals, 10 more shadows poofed into existence and disappeared in a blink. Bear and Wolf were taken aback at how quickly Shadow's shadow clones could disappear without a trace, and the implications of cage buncheons being several degrees slower and weaker than the original. They felt shivers flow down their spines at how easily Shadow followed his directive to thrive in himself. Without another word, the group departed through the gates and set off north, allowing Wolf, with her heightened sense of smell, to lead. They traveled for several hours before Weasel called a break. He set Shadow, the major stamina freak, to be on guard, seeing as he wasn't even winded. 5 shadows popped into being and disappeared, setting up a perimeter. The group semi-relaxed, being ready in an instant if need be, and began talking amongst themselves, getting to know each other. "So, Shadow," Bear began, "you seem pretty silent for your public reputation. True shinobi mislead even their comrades, for if you can fool friends, what chance have enemies?" Before anyone said anything more, Shadow stiffened considerably, then vanished from view instantaneously. A moment later, he reappeared with a bloody lump dressed vaguely like a Kiri nin. But the slash through the headband belied the affiliation. A Nukanen had almost gotten the drop on them. But almost wasn't good enough. "You'll have to do much better than that to get the drop on us," Wolf growled threateningly with an aggressive step forward. The female Nukanen snickered mirthlessly and rose unsteadily. "A squad of Konoha ANBU scum." Shadow grumbled and stepped forward. "You can drop the henge, moron. It's obvious you're Iwa. Kiri don't call Konoha scum, just lesser." The Nukanen dropped the henge with a pop, and there stood an Iwa kunoichi with no scratch. "And when will you drop the grudge over the war? Lord Fourth did what he had to, just as you did by following orders and attacking us in the first place." The kunoichi snarled. "That blonde monster slaughtered retreating people. He was absolute trash." Shadow stiffened considerably, and Weasel backed away nervously. "And what would you have done in his place?" came the barely audible whisper, before Shadow darted forward and began literally tearing the Iwa kunoichi apart. His teammates watched in horror as the woman screamed in agony while her limbs were ripped from their sockets by bare hands, and her entrails were tugged from her gut while she was still awake and able to feel it. As she lay there, bleeding out and crying, Shadow leaned over her and whispered menacingly, "Say what you will about me, but insult my comrades, you die. Insult my hero, you die painfully. Now, before you die, tell me how many of your comrades are left, and how many are worth my attention." Fuck. You." She gasped as her eyes lolled and her head fell, a wet gurgle escaping her mouth. Shadow stood and turned to face his team, who were all staring at him in abject horror. Even Weasel was terrified, being a pacifist at heart, but he couldn't deny that Shadow was efficient, even if he could stand to be less cruel and ruthless. It almost reminded him of the Fourth when he got angry. Coupled with Shadow's mother's temper, and Weasel was now genuinely frightened of his second-in-command. "We should move out," Shadow said calmly, all trace of rage gone. Before anyone said anything, several kunai shot out and made Wolf into a pincushion. Shadow immediately screamed out to her, then his vision went red. "Yes, Kit, that's right. Use my power, fuel your anger. Unleash fury." Naruto heard a very deep, rumbling voice in his head, but he couldn't see anything past the red in his vision, couldn't think past the overwhelming fury of the loss. He vaguely heard agonized screams, and felt warmth on his arms, but couldn't comprehend past that. Naruto snapped forward, pulling himself from the memories. He shuddered, unnoticed by Konohamaru, and scowled. Why would that come to mind? "I hate that day. I lost a teammate for the first time, and nearly lost my own life as a result of the rage. But you also met me, Kit. You finally discovered why people hated you." True. Flashback soon after, inside Naruto's mind. Naruto opened his eyes and saw blackness. Water was everywhere on the ground, but instead of the sewer he for some reason expected, he saw ancient red brick walls, with red and blue channels carved into them, almost like an ancient temple of some sort. He strode forward and entered what appeared to be a ritual chamber. In the center there was a hole, but it reached in concentric circles from the very edge of the room, almost like an amphitheater. At the very center, the lowest point, a small reddish-brown animal was chained heavily, and was tugging at the bonds. Naruto walked calmly down to it, and saw it was a fox. "Are you just going to stare at me, or loosen these chains?" "Why would I do that? I don't understand everything, but you're obviously constrained for a reason. And judging by how you knew I was here without looking up at me, I would say we're inside my mind." "Very astute, Kit. Now shut up and loosen the chains. I want to stretch." "Too bad. My mind, my rules. You get nothing until I get answers." the small fox grumbled in its abnormally deep voice, way out of proportion to its size, and gnashed teeth for several moments. Fine, it growled finally. I am the great Kyuubi no Kitsune, greatest of the Biju, and in Taiti of pure chakra, fed by the malice and anger of the human race. I am also the embodiment of righteous fury, as defined by my father, the Rikudo Sennin. And, by a comical twist of fate, I am stuck inside you, an insolent, disrespectful whelp who can't even channel my chakra properly, although that is mostly because of this damnable seal placed by that by your fourth Hokage. So, you were sealed inside me the night you attacked Konohagakure, which happens to also be the day I was born. Why did you attack? The small fox grumbled something quietly and pawed at the ground. What was that? I said, I was being controlled by a Sharingan user. And my name is Kurama, Kit. With a nod, Naruto stepped forward and removed some of the chains from the small, somewhat adorable fox, leaving only manacles around the neck, legs, and newly revealed waving tails. All 9 of them. Kurama immediately began frolicking as far as the chains would let him, which was about halfway up the rows. Naruto chuckled. Ah, that feels much better. Now then, in return for so much freedom, I will give you gifts of sense. As soon as you agree, your hearing will be better than any ninkin's, even when augmented with chakra, your nose as well. Your eyes will be able to see in the dark at will, and will be able to see small details from up to 500 yards. Your senses of touch and taste will remain the same though. No strings attached. Also, I would like a mental link with you so we can talk at any time. I agree. Your wisdom will be useful, and your gifts will surely help me. The two nodded to each other, and Naruto turned on his heel to leave. Kit, Kurama called, causing Naruto to pause. You will not be all-powerful. You will not be able to protect everyone. You should steel yourself for inevitable lose and pain. Even your grandfather knows this. Naruto stiffened, then kept walking without a word. He woke to find limbs and blood everywhere, and himself leaning over Wolf's mangled form, tears rolling out from beneath his mask. Kona, can you go tell Oba-chan I'll be down for dinner? Naruto asked his younger cousin, who would be starting the academy in just a few years. Konohamaru nodded enthusiastically, his hair fluffing everywhere, then bolted from the room, his scarf flying behind him. Naruto smiled sadly, then moved to the window and jumped out. Sorry, Kona, but I've got some searching to do. Within moments, the final remaining member of Black Squad was gone without a trace from the Sarutobi household. 2 young girls felt chills run up their spines nearby, but couldn't explain them. Naruto was flitting from roof to roof, unseen and unheard, carefully avoiding detection by the ANBU on duty. He had yet to leave the clan's district of the village, because his gut was telling him his problem was there. He was currently just inside the Hyuga compound wall, and was sneaking along, keeping an ear cocked and his senses peeled for one of the Byakugan users. He was stopped short as he passed over the main house manor. Anyo, F father? What would happen if AJ Junin B became an A- Academy S student? Naruto very nearly slipped as he heard the shy, stuttering voice of his classmate, Hyuga Hinata, the Hyuga heiress. Why do you ask, Hinata? Was just curious. Naruto could all but see her poking her index fingers together as her voice trailed off. Hiyashi, the clan head, spoke again, in a voice so smug Naruto knew he was seen by the man. Well, for argument's sake, let us say that a high-level shinobi was stripped of his rank and sent back to the academy. He or she would have to be academy age. High, Hinata said slowly. Then the shinobi would have to most likely put on a very convincing act so as to divert attention from themselves, likely using a public persona already in place. Hinata made a small, confirming noise. And if it so happened that this person was found out by accident, they would need to tie up loose ends to ensure their own safety. A small heap of fear ensued, followed by sounds of scurrying away. Hiyashi stepped out onto the grass and breathed deeply. You shrewd son of a bitch. How long did you know? Young man, I knew from a young age you would be exceptional. To put 2 and 2 together, that a very deadly ANBU disappears the same year you begin academy and fully enter the public eye? An idiot could figure it out. Obviously not, considering damn near the whole village, the other ANBU included, didn't notice that little coincidence, Naruto remarked dryly as he dropped down next to the man. Hiyashi grunted slightly, still staring at the stars. I wish to thank you for watching over us all these times. You saved my daughters on more than one occasion. I am indebted to you. Nonsense, I just wanted your family to remain as whole as it currently is. Neither of them should go through what I did. But I must say, it still confuses me why you're so strict with Hinata in public, but act like a father in private. Just let the world know you love your daughter. Hiyashi grimaced. Would that I could. I treat Hanabi the same way in public, so that I cannot be accused of favoritism. In any case, I suspect you must continue your search. Rest assured, your secret will not be spilled by any lips here. With a quick bow, Naruto vanished to continue his quest. Surely only Hinata could have somehow seen? Right? Even his abysmal luck outside of gambling and cons couldn't screw him this time? Please, Kami, please let it just be Hinata. But his pleas fell on deaf ears as he passed silently over the path between the Akamichi and Yamanaka compounds. Daddy, what do you know about that boy in my class? Naruto? This time, Naruto really did slip, right off a tree branch, down to the Akamichi compound wall, in the most unfortunate position possible. He groaned and fell to the side, landing in the walkway, cupping his groin and trying not to squeal like a pig, or a fangirl. I know he's been very lonely most of his life. Naruto-san, what are you doing here at this hour? Inoichi asked as he stared in confusion at the young blonde curled into a ball, holding his balls. Writhing in pain, Naruto wheezed out. Inoichi flinched in sympathy and moved to help Naruto up. Once the younger blonde was on his feet, one hand still gingerly protecting his bits, Ino spoke up. That's so weird. We were just talking about you. What happened the other day, in class? I fell asleep long enough to have night terrors. Contrary to popular belief, night terrors do not set in as soon as the victim is asleep. Instead, they replace dreams and REM sleep, very violently, as you observed. I meant when the Hokage and that Junin busted in, Ino said, her eyes narrowing to a squint as she appraised her fellow blonde. That was my Gigi and my Two-san. They were worried when I screamed. As was most of the T&I department, Inoichi muttered under his breath. What was that, Daddy? Nothing, Princess. Anyway, I was just on my way back to the Sarutobi compound, so if you'll excuse me. But before he could scamper away, Ino grabbed his arm and flashed a sickeningly sweet smile that made both men in the immediate area shiver in terror. Oh, but I wanted to talk to you. Please don't make me wait, she said with a pout, sticking her bottom lip out and making her eyes watery, on command, which is what scared Naruto. Now I see why Inoichi-sama is wrapped around her little finger. This girl is almost as devious and manipulative as me. In the T&I department main office, Morino Ibiki felt a frighteningly cold chill run up his spine, the same he felt when he faced that little blonde monster several years ago. He liked Naruto, but the boy scared him, which in itself was a feat. Why do I get the feeling in a few years I'll be so outdated that he will replace me? Ibiki thought uncomfortably. And Inoichi's daughter? He shivered again, then resumed his paperwork. Back with Naruto. No, I guess Oba-chan wouldn't mind if I was a little late to dinner. He never managed to finish his thought, because Ino bolted off, dragging him behind her. He, of course, could go much faster, but she didn't need to know that, if she didn't already. They got out of the clans district and stopped in a park, where Ino planted him onto a bench, then glared at him. How did you move so fast the other day? Naruto immediately threw up an emotionless mask that Itachi had taught him. I have no idea what you mean, he said calmly, already thinking of multiple ways of removing her ability to talk should the need arise. You had one of that Junin's trench knives up under his chin before any of us could blink. No academy student could do that. Explain. Naruto smirked haughtily and leveled his cold gaze at the young blonde before him. She soon began to fidget uncomfortably. You might have your father twisted around your whim, but it will take a lot longer before you can manipulate me, Miss Yamanka. Try again at a later date, he said as he rose and began walking away. He got all of 10 steps before he sensed a presence that he knew wasn't supposed to be there, because he'd felt it when he escorted the Hokage to the cage summit 2 years ago. It was Akiri ANBU. He stopped and turned to the girl. Would you like me to walk you home, Ino? No young lady should walk around at night alone. Something untoward might happen. Ino looked suspicious, but seemed to catch on to at least some of what he was saying, so she faked a giggle and accepted, wrapping her arms around Naruto's offered one. They walked silently for about a block before Naruto said something to her, leaning in and whispering to seem as though he was making a move, despite them being 11 years old. They both were going through puberty anyway, so Naruto wasn't scared. Oh, the wonders of having an advanced nose, like knowing when a girl is going through puberty sooner than she should. I'll tell you this, I'm much more than I seem, and letting that become common knowledge would be very bad. There is a Kiri Nin following us, but I'm not sure which of us is the target. I'll walk you home to your father, then leave. Now act like I said something flattering. Ino, to her credit, took it all in stride and began tittering and fluttering her eyelashes in a very girlish manner. This girl can act well. Should shinobi life not work out for her, she has a promising future in theater. Focus, Kit. Get her home, then fawn over her. Naruto frowned to himself, but ignored the jab. He made small talk with Ino for the few blocks to her house, keeping his chakra sense open for any sudden moves by the ANBU tailing them. He managed to get Ino to her door before the shinobi struck, aiming at both of them. Evidently, someone wanted Naruto dead, and the Yamanaka clan crippled. 2 kunai knives flew from a tree several yards back, but Naruto whirled quicker than the eye could follow and caught them, launching them back before the assailant could react. A feminine cry of pain resounded and the mist nin fell out of the tree, clutching on arm and on leg. Naruto was on her in an instant, disabling the other 2 appendages quickly. Ino, get your father, he said sternly without looking back. He could feel the dumbstruck look on her face as she dumbly backed into the house and called for Inoichi. The man came running, his long blonde hair disheveled. He zeroes in on Naruto crouching threateningly over the foreign shinobi. He strode up next to his fellow blonde and stared down at the captive. Naruto was in the process of removing her mask. The fact that she had not crunched a poison capsule yet showed either she was too valuable to be equipped with one, or was confident she could escape. Naruto removed her mask, after several moments of struggling, and cold-cocked her across the jaw, throwing her head to the side. A hollow tooth danced out across the pavement, filled with a small purple pill. First rule of ANBU, the boy whispered menacingly to the brunette. You get caught or incapacitated, crunch the damn pill. Even if there's a chance you can escape. You are one, stupid bitch. Her eyes grew wide, before he slammed his fist into her cheek, knocking her out. He then stood and turned to the Yamanaka patriarch. Inoichi-sama, he said with a low bow. I hereby surrender this kunoichi into your custody as Lieutenant Commander of the Torture and Interrogation Department. Have a nice evening, and please give my regards and sincerest apologies to Ino-san. He turned on his heel, leaving the gobsmacked man where he stood, and strode quickly away, heading straight home. He entered through the front door to hear the sounds of dinner plates being placed, Asuma and Hiruzen discussing something quietly, and Konohamaru talking excitedly to his mother. Naruto strode in and sat in his seat without a word, just watching his family. No one noticed him, which was not an odd occurrence. Suddenly, Boar shunshined in and bowed to the Hokage, though the man was not wearing his hat or robes. Hokage-sama, he said in a fairly deep voice. Several moments ago, a Kiri ANBU was captured attempting to take the life of one Ino Yamanaka and one other undisclosed person. Yamanaka-sama is escorting her unconscious form to the T&I department, under guard. Hiruzen looked stunned, then saw the faint smile on the face of his elder grandson. He sighed and nodded. Very good, I'll expect a report on my desk tomorrow. But for now, I am about to enjoy dinner with my family. Good evening, Boar-san. Boar saluted and shunshined out, leaving the room silent for a moment. So, Naru, Asuma said with a great level of mirth poorly hidden in his voice. How'd your walk go? Naruto shrugged. Same old, 2-chan. Did a brief workout between the Yamanaka and Akamichi compuns. You know, limber up. But I did slip in a loose twig and injure my groin, he added with a wince. Everyone in the room winced in sympathy, except Konohamaru, who looked lost. Other than that, nothing out of the ordinary. I certainly didn't hear anything like what Boar-san mentioned. He held a straight face while his aunt ferried food out of the kitchen. When she sat and the thanks were said, he maintained a totally blank face, even though both his dad and grandpa were trying their absolute best to not laugh. Even shinobi can't control themselves all the time, as was evidenced by both men suddenly howling in laughter, slamming the table with their fists. Even Cassie, the one who usually remained passive and calm, was near hysterics with mirth. Naruto smiled, and Konohamaru was looking at everyone like they'd gone mad. Naruto just continued smiling while his family devolved further into laughter. His identity was assuredly safe. His family was safe. His friends were alive. It was a good evening. Naruto yawned and stretched, his comforter falling off his torso as he sat up in his bed. That was a decent nap. I even managed to get several in throughout the night. I should be good for class today. Yes, Kit, we wouldn't want a repeat of last week, would we? Naruto grimaced at the reminder of his unfortunate situation. Well, I'm absolutely sure Hinata won't say anything. And Ino. She's still a risk, but a significantly smaller one. I'll have to talk to both of them, or get Shika too. The only response from the demon fox was a grunt. Naruto was dressed and heading down the stairs before Kurama spoke again. Kit, I never truly understood. What caused you to start having night terrors in the first place? Flashback 8 years ago, 2 years before Naruto's adoption. A 2-year-old Naruto was sitting on the curb, bawling heavily. He had just been kicked out of the orphanage. The matron, a cruel, vindictive woman to him at least, had shouted at him and smacked him a lot, stating that if he was old enough to walk and talk, he was old enough to fend for himself. Never mind the fact Naruto still fell a good deal, and could only just form coherent sentences. He sat there for he didn't know how long, before a silver-haired ANBU in a dog mask walked over to him and sat next to him, placing his arm around the boy's shoulder and stroking his hair softly while humming a tune that sounded extremely familiar. He just couldn't place it. "I Inu," he bawled. "Wa does everyone hate me?" He cried loudly and buried his face into the side of the very solid man next to him. He heard the ANBU make an unhappy sound, but he kept running his fingers, currently ungloved, through the blonde locks. "Not everyone hates you, Naruto. I don't, the Hokage doesn't, and Miss Snake Lady seems to like you, right?" He got a tearful nod from the boy. "How about this, I'll help you find her, and she can help you feel better. I'm on duty, so technically I'm not even supposed to be talking to you right now, but screw that." He stood and held a hand out to the still crying blonde, who took it gingerly, seriously expecting some kind of trick or being hit, which made Inu's blood boil in rage that this sweet boy, who was supposed to be his little brother, was conditioned to fear and distrust people. He walked along, casting cold, angry glares from behind his mask at anyone who so much as looked at the boy wrong. To say he was in breach of protocol was an understatement, but he didn't give a damn. They walked for several blocks, before they came to the best place to find one Mitarashi Anko, or Miss Snake Lady, as Naruto called her. Quick Leaf Dango. She was between Inu, at 21, and Naruto, at 2, in age. Roughly 15 or 16, and she was already a high-level chunin. The girl showed promise. Naruto had stopped crying a block ago, because he'd heard a commotion coming from the Snake Lady's favorite dango shop. They made it, and were about to enter, when they had to scuttle to the side because 2 burly men wrapped in small vipers were tossed out the window, shattering it, and subsequently rolled across the street. "And if I ever catch you near this shop again, I'll make sure you don't recover," came a cry of anger. Naruto began bouncing excitedly, all trace of tears gone. He loved it when other people got beat up instead of him. Well, he liked it when mean people got beat up. Those 2 he recognized as mean people. "Snake Lady," he cried giddily and ran through the door, leaping at Anko as soon as he saw her. She'd been prepared by his shout though. She caught him and twirled, giggling madly and hugging the boy, causing everyone in the restaurant to sweat drop at the 180 her demeanor had taken. "Naruto-kun. Oh, I missed you. What's it been? 3-4 weeks? You saw me yesterday." The boy giggled. Inu chose that moment to catch Anko's attention. She sat down the boy in her booth and walked over to him. They didn't get along well, but they had the blonde in common, so they stayed cordial. "Naruto was kicked out of the orphanage," Inu said quietly, looking at the boy as he drank a soda the shop owner had brought him. Anko's face immediately showed fury. Inu held up a hand. "I'll take care of that. You need to keep him happy for the rest of the day, let him sleep at your place if you can." She nodded and looked back at the child, her eyes softening. "I'll ask Yuguo Ne. She'll probably say yes." With the ode to each other, Anko went to sit with Naruto, while Inu shunshined to the orphanage and got to work. "So, Naru-kun, what do you want to do?" Anko asked as she rested her chin in one hand, the other twirling an empty dango stick. "I dunno. Every time I go to the park, everyone ignores me, and when I stay at the orphanage, everyone ignores me. The only people who don't are you, Inu, Gigi, and the Ichirakus. The boy took a moment to properly say the name of the ramen stand owners. Anko almost snickered at the mispronunciation. She loved that book series. For several hours, Anko led the blonde around the village, doing different activities to keep him happy. When night fell, two ANBU appeared. Sparrow and Eagle. Eagle approached Anko and began a conversation. Anko-san, Hokage-sama requests your presence in the tower. We are going to walk Naruto to his lodging for the night. Anko nodded, gave Naruto a deep hug, then left. When she was gone, Sparrow turned to the blonde and cracked his knuckles with a malicious chuckle. A loud agonized scream tore through the village, making even the most toughened shinobi in the village shiver in fear. I see, Kurama said slowly as Naruto relived the horror of that night. When he joined the ANBU, he'd tracked down the two culprits and made their lives a living hell, but even that couldn't make the terrors go away. So he set up the nap schedule. He never slept long enough for them to set in. He never showed anyone the scars because that would raise questions, and he generally avoided those. So he remained silent and bore the horror of his past on his own. He chose the path of suffering, rather than hurt those he loved. Naruto walked into class with a laugh. Sasuke had just told a joke about two weasels and a beanbag chair, which Naruto found hilarious. He felt every gaze in the room snap to him as he approached his seat. He also saw Iruka back at the front of class. Naruto, I trust you are well rested for class? Yes, Iruka-sensei, Naruto said in a bored tone. Iruka nodded and turned to the board, finalizing his diagrams for today's lesson. Naruto sat, with Sasuke on his right and Shika on his left. Kiba and Choji sat on the row in front of them. Anyo. May I sit there? He heard from behind him. He cast a mostly disinterested eye behind him to see Hinata standing in her way, timidly poking her index fingers together and pointing at a seat right behind him. He looked further and noticed that Sakura was sitting in the adjacent seat, right behind Sasuke. Naruto nudged his friend with a discreet elbow and nodded slightly at the interaction. Sasuke turned also and frowned seeing a fangirl sitting behind him. Why? Trying to get close to Sasuke-kun? The pink-haired Kunoichi hopeful said in, surprisingly, a normal voice. Naruto cocked one eyebrow at the change in her volume level. Hinata has shown no interest at all in Sasuke. Why would bubblegum be so suspicious? Sasuke and Naruto exchanged a confused look, then one of annoyance as Sakura continued. No, that seat is saved anyway. Hey, Shikamaru, you mind moving down a tier? You can sit next to Choji. Shika caught on and gave an affirming grunt, then rose and took his new seat. Nary 8, troublesome, was said. Here, Hinata, you can have this seat. It's open, Naruto said with a gesture and a cold glare at Sakura. The girl wilted a little, while Hinata gave a small eep and turned crimson as she took the offered seat. She steadily turned redder as the seconds ticked by. Naruto smirked at Sasuke and leaned over to the girl. Hinata-chan, I know you like me, he said in a low voice so only she heard him. She went totally stiff and turned so red, Naruto was sure her heart was about to fail from lack of blood to pump. I'm sorry, but we can't be more than friends. My reputation as a prankster has made most people wary of me, and there are other issues that your elders will have with me. I'll be happy to be your friend, but that's all I can be. Maybe you should try Kiba? He's been looking at you a lot lately. The girl slowly turned very pale and dejected as Naruto went on. He felt bad about that, but he had to be upfront so as to not give her false hope. She finally gave a small, sad nod and rested her chin dejectedly on the desk in front of her, her eyes glazing over. He was about to turn and talk with Sasuke again, when he heard a FWUMP behind him. Pig, that seat is reserved. Move. Naruto and Sasuke broke into large grins and turned to watch the show. Despite how annoying it got, they loved watching the two rivals for the Uchiha's affections fight. Hell, if they could find the pattern and sell tickets, they'd make a killing. Naruto was currently working on finding the pattern, both of their meet-ups and their fights, and Sasuke was planning the business approach. This was the final recon for the blonde. Who's it saved for? Forehead. Your imaginary chance with Sasuke-kun? Naruto had to snort at that one, and cast a look at his best friend, holding a silent conversation. As if she's one to talk, Well, Sasuke, she doesn't really like you all that much. A confused look on the Uchiha's face. What? She's just as bad as Sakura. No, not really. If you watch her closely, but discreetly, you'll notice she has no heart in the rivalry. She's mainly doing it for some connection to her friend, who ended the friendship. Sasuke nodded in understanding and continued watching. It still amazed Naruto that in 7 months since actually becoming friends, the two had gotten to know each other so well, they could understand each other and hold entire conversations just through facial expressions. But it certainly made things interesting when they picked up each other's sentences to mess with people. He focused his attention back on the two girls, who were pushing shoulders and glaring at each other, sparks flashing in their eyes. Even Iruka was watching in amusement. Finally, Shino walked in, saw the atmosphere and turned to Naruto. "Naruto-san," he said calmly. "May I sit with your group today? Seeing as my usual seat is within range of an extremely volatile explosion waiting to happen." Naruto smirked in laughter and nodded, indicating the empty seat in the row in front of him, right next to Kiba. "Welcome to the club, Shino. We look forward to being friends with you," Naruto said with a smile, to which Shino crinkled his eyebrows in confusion. "Here's how it works, Buggy," said Kiba with a snicker. "Once you sit around Naruto, you start talking to Naruto. Once you start talking to Naruto, you never stop. Eventually you'll feel as comfortable in the group as you do with those bugs in your jacket." Kiba?" The Inuzuka turned to the blonde with a grunt. "Those bugs aren't in his jacket. They're in his body." Kiba's eyes grew wide and he snapped his gaze to the Aburame. "Didn't you pay attention when your Ka-san taught you about the other Konoha clans?" A very sheepish look appeared on Kiba's face. Naruto sighed. The Aburame host Kikachu beetles inside their bodies, as a hive, and in exchange they are allowed to direct them, feed them chakra, and thus are not easily susceptible to genjutsu, on account of the constant fluctuations in their chakra, and gain various other benefits. Shino looked impressed, as much as he could with most of his face covered, and Sasuke scowled. "I never got the clan's lesson," he muttered under his breath. He looked back when he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry Sasuke, I'll give it to you. Come with me to my house today, and I'll help you out." That caught the quarreling girl's attention. Ino perked up with a confused look. "Clan's lesson? Daddy never taught me anything about the other clans. He just said all I need to know about is Akamichi and Nara." "Yeah, my dad said the same," Choji said, lowering his bag of chips. "My dad said it was too troublesome to teach me anything, really, so he just played shogi," Shikamaru said with a frown. Kiba muttered something and scratched behind Akamaru's ear. Naruto crinkled his brows. "What about you, Shino? Father was always busy. So, no, I have also not received any instruction on our fellow clans, unfortunately. Hinata, please me tell you. Father W was more focused on the gentle fist. A loud whop followed as Naruto drove his forehead violently into the desk. "Of course I'm the only one with knowledge of my classmates' clans. And people say I'm the Dobi. I know about the clans," Sakura said haughtily, puffing her chest out and smiling proudly at Sasuke. "That's great, Sakura. Now how about you shut up and let the clan kids talk, nay?" Sasuke said with a dismissive flap of his hand. The girl deflated instantly. "Okay, how about this? All of you come over to my house today, after letting your parents know," he said quickly, with a pointed look at Kiba. "And I can give all of you the information you'll need to deal with other clans. Then, we might try to train a little," he said with a smirk, making Sasuke, Kiba, Choji, and Shikamaru grimace. They'd tried training with Naruto once. They'd been dying of thirst and lack of oxygen by the time he was mildly winded. "A stamina freak doing ANBU level training? Oh Kami. What? We get training at home," Ino said a little snobbily. "Yes, Miss Yamanka, I can clearly see that you put every effort to improving your shinobi skills," Naruto responded with no small amount of sarcasm. "Sasuke, would you assess Miss Yamanaka and give your honest report?" Sasuke nodded, then gestured for Ino to stand and move to the aisle. She did so with some trepidation, feeling a large fear growing in her gut. He studied her critically for a moment, then twirled his fingers slightly. Ino spun slowly. "Well," he said slowly. The entire class, Iruka included, leaned in to hear the verdict of the last Uchiha, upon whom everyone placed their hopes for the village. You're weak. You wouldn't last in a real fight. You put too much stock in your appearance, and I could see you depending on your teammates instead of trying to carry your weight. There's potential for you to improve, but right now, you get in everyone's way. Ino seemed to deflate, even more so when she saw the disapproving look Naruto was giving her. Since when was Naruto's opinion important? He was not only an idiot, he was new to the class, yet he somehow seemed to hold the respect of everyone just by entering the room. Suddenly, Sakura let out a loud cheer of "Yada!" and began dancing a small jig. "Why are you happy?" Sasuke sent her a small glare as Naruto spoke. "You're worse than Ino is. At least she, coming from a shinobi clan, has a few useful jutsu that make her not completely deadweight. You're a civilian, and only unlocked your chakra at the lesson last week. You focus so much on gaining Sasuke's attention, and preventing others from having it, you threw a friendship down the drain. You've been too absorbed with yourself and your fantasies of Sasuke that you didn't even notice Ino only puts effort into your supposed rivalry to have some sort of connection to her old friend. You're a disgusting excuse for a kunoichi," Naruto said coldly. Sakura seemed to shrivel for a moment, but bounced back. "What you say doesn't matter, Naruto Baka, who are you too?" "He's right," Sasuke said curtly, cutting her off. "And I'd say his opinion holds more weight than anyone else in this room. He was raised and trained by the Hokage. He probably helped out when he could and saw plenty of shinobi and kunoichi. And saw the aftermath of people who didn't take the career seriously." That made Sakura fall listlessly, her face falling to despair to hear her precious Sasuke-kun criticizing her so viciously. Naruto nodded and stood. "This goes for all of you," he bellowed to the room, looking at every fangirl and young boy who, at this moment, were seriously doubting their abilities. "This is not a job, it's a career. If you don't put everything you have into it, all your time and heart, then you will die. This is not something you do to win the attention of someone, or to be cool. If those are your reasons, leave now," he growled finally before striding to the front of the class, stalking quickly with a predatory stance. "Iruka-sensei, I'm leaving. I need to get away from all these wannabes," he snarled, before he slammed the door shut, making everyone jump. Sasuke rose, casting his cool gaze at everyone in the room. "I'm going with him, sensei. He, at least, knows the value of trying." His words drove it home for everyone. Naruto, even though he was the worst in the class, was always trying. He never gave up, and always gave his best. Everyone had a difficult choice to make. Do they risk the chance? Or do they throw their futures away? "Naru, why are you home so early?" Asuma asked lazily, without looking up from his paper. The blonde growled some unintelligible response and stormed up the stairs, slamming the door to his room. Asuma and Hiruzen jumped at the sudden noise and looked at each other in concern. Their answer came in the form on a raven-haired orphan entering the building like it was his own home. "Hey, Gigi, hey Oji," Sasuke said with a lazy wave. The Uchiha had begun calling Naruto's family his own several weeks earlier. He stormed to his room? "Yep, what happened?" Asuma asked, concern evident on his face. Haruno Sakura said the wrong thing at the wrong time. Yamanaka Ino was constructively criticized by Naruto, and Sakura made it seem like she was better. So, he flew off the handle and made them all question themselves and their reasons for being shinobi. Trust Naruto to make the next generation question themselves so early, Hiruzen sighed. What started all of it? Aburame Shino sat with us, and Kiba didn't know about his insects, which made the rest of his clan heirs and heiresses realize we knew nothing about the other clans. Naruto offered to teach us. Hiruzen's eyebrows crinkled. 7 future clan heads know nothing about other clans? Sasuke began ticking reasons off on his fingers. Hinata said her father was more focused on their taijutsu. Choji and Ino said their fathers both said they only need to know about the Nara, Akamichi, and Yamanka respectively. Shika said his dad never mentioned it because it was troublesome. That does sound like Shikaku. Asuma yawned. Kiba didn't pay attention when his mom gave him the lesson. Shino said his dad hadn't gotten to it yet because he was too busy, and I wasn't Uchiha heir until everyone else was killed. I was never taught about politics. I see. Hiruzen began. And would I be correct in guessing Naruto said he would teach you all about the clans of the village? His answer was a nod. Then maybe you should go get him, because the rest of his students are currently eavesdropping right outside our front door. He finished with a smirk as the large group of clan children fell through the door, with Kiba and Choji on the bottom of the pile. Then Shino and Shikamaru, with Hinata and Ino falling on top. Lol Ino Shika Cho in descending order. I warned you we would be unsuccessful in attempting to eavesdrop on an elite Junin and the Hokage, Shino said as Hinata meeped cutely and climbed off of the insect user. It was worth a shot, at least, said the brash one, as his ninkin growled from inside his jacket. Akamaru did not appreciate being almost crushed. Sasuke snickered heartily at the group's misfortune. Once all were once more on their feet, Hiruzen invited them to the table for some tea. So, he said when they were all seated, "Why are you all out of the academy early?" The lazy genius was the first to respond. Iruka-sensei decided to dismiss class because he wanted to avoid something happening. Quite a few of our classmates began having life crisis right after Naruto left. We all rushed home to get permission from our parents, some more reluctantly than others, he said with a lazy glare at Kiba, who looked away grumbling. You'd be reluctant too if you had my mother. Then we came here, summarized the Nara. At that exact moment, the blonde menace flew down the stairs. Before anyone even realized anything, he was out the door, leaving a trail of dust and papers, and a significant breeze, in his wake. Was that Naruto? Ino said in clear confusion, her carefully maintained ponytail now disheveled, as she looked after the blur. The only time Naru moves like that. Asuma began. Konohamaru, Hiruzen, and Sasuke all shouted at once. The two older men dashed after the blonde, to assist in whatever capacity they may, while Sasuke, who knew he would only be a hindrance, remained, wringing his hands. Kiba, Shikamaru, and Choji, who had met the young Sarutobi, walked over, and the four began a small discussion among themselves. What do you think it is? Whispered Kiba. It's not bullies, otherwise Naruto wouldn't have been in such a hurry, Choji reasoned. Troublesome. Either it's villagers being idiots, or something bigger. Either way, Naruto and his family are on it. I just wish I could help. Sasuke fretted, with Hiruzen and Asuma as they catch up with Naruto. Naru, what's happening? Someone was in Kona's room. They took him and bolted before I could even register. Why didn't you follow them through the window? Hiruzen shouted. The blonde turned to face his Gigi, jumping backwards easily thanks to his incredible balance and knowledge of the village. Because then I wouldn't have back up against who knows how many enemies. He flipped around and dashed off again, forcing massive amounts of chakra into his legs and feet to literally rocket him off the buildings. Soon, 4 ANBU and a few other regular shinobi were joining the chase. Naruto, along with the Hyuga and Inuzuka ANBU, were trying to pick up the trail. Uzumaki-san, why are you here? Cobra asked calmly. The Jinchuriki turned a suddenly scarlet glare on the man, releasing the Kyuubi's chakra enough to make everyone in the pursuit shiver in fear. That's my cousin. I'll be damned before I let some scumbag hurt my family. The questioner fell back, holding his hands up in surrender. Naruto suddenly perked and changed paths. He was now headed to the other side of the village, a crimson cloak forming around his body, boosting his speed even more. The group scattered, preferring to not be near the boy should he become a conduit of rage. Only Asuma and Hiruzen were still following, and they were falling behind. A silver blur blasted past, keeping up with the blonde one. Kakashi, keep them safe, Asuma screamed at his friend. With Naruto. Senpai, Naruto said without looking back. He saw, out of the corner of his eye, Kakashi cock his head in confusion for a moment. Wha? Not now, Kakashi. Where's Guy? I smell at least 5 guys, plus Kona. Yosh, Naruto-kun, we shall defeat these UNYOUTHFUL rapscallions. Impeccable timing, Guy, Kakashi said dryly. He got a deep belly laugh. They both looked at the blonde, who was still cloaked in red chakra, with a Oritail now. They stopped just ahead. I guess they didn't expect pursuit. Morons, muttered the Cyclops. The trio was now just past the Hokage monument, and so were in the forest surrounding Konoha. They blasted through a tangle of branches into a clearing. They landed, ready, only to grow stiff as they saw 5 shinobi, 2 with kunai held to Konohamaru's throat. The boy was crying silently. Oh, we were just expecting the brat, but we get the copy ninja and… What the hell is with that guy's eyebrows? Said the leader, one of the 2 with a kunai held to Kona's throat. He pressed it a bit and drew a line of blood. What do you want with me? Growled the blonde. His fingernails grew to claws and his whisker marks became thicker as he channeled more chakra from Kurama. "The Kyuubi," said one of the nin quickly. Naruto flicked his eyes to the man, then to each one's forehead. 5 Nukanin, 2 of them women. Formerly of Suna. Naruto growled ferally and let his glare bore into the 2 holding kunai. "Let the kid go." The entire group, including Konohamaru, Kakashi, and Guy shuddered in fear at the pure malice and rage in the blonde's voice. The 2 with blades flinched, withdrawing their knives with the action. Naruto bolted forward as fast as he could and snatched his cousin up, then returned to his place, Konohamaru perched on his back. He created 2 seal-less cage buncheons and handed the child to them. "Get him out of here." "Yes sir, boss," the clone said in unison with a salute before disappearing. The blonde turned his crimson gaze on the 5 nuke nins. "Kakashi, take the girl on the far left. Guy on far right. I've got the 3 in the middle. Little Gaki, aren't you?" said the leader, recovered from his fear. "We're all elite. We were the Cage's elite guard." "Oh yeah?" Naruto smiled wolfishly as he dropped to all fours. "Well, you're facing 3 of the deadliest motherfuckers in Konoha. How do you think you'll fare against a former ANBU, the elemental nation's greatest taijutsu expert, and a pissed-off Jinchuriki? What do you think, Kakashi? I think Guy and I have some of the highest bounties on the continent, and you scare us anyway." With that, the 3 Konoha residents dashed forward, engaging their respective foes. With Kakashi, "Fuck you Scarecrow. I'll wipe the floor with you, then take the Gaki." Kakashi yawned as he pulled 2 kunai, holding them in a reverse grip and began slashing expertly, forcing the woman to dodge. He observed her as he made her bend awkwardly. She was about 5'6", with soft brown hair. Her eyes were a light green and set close together. A scar ran across her cheek, from ear to cheekbone, evidence of a past mistake. He couldn't help but notice she was fairly shapely with C-cup S and a nice firm rear. A shame. She was dressed in green shirt and light brown skirt. Her calves were wrapped in bandages. He kept up the lazy pace of slashes, until she growled in frustration and jumped back for room. Then, she began weaving signs. Kakashi lifted his Hiat 8, exposing his red Sharingan eye. He quickly began copying the woman's jutsu, soon catching up to her. They unleashed it at the same time. Fuuten. Diatapa. The twin blasts of hurricane force wind met each other and exploded outward, creating a scar in the ground. "I'm surprised you didn't already know that one," the woman huffed. "Not many wind users in the elemental nations," Kakashi said, bored. "If this was Suna's elite, no wonder the village was in ruins. Gotta say, for an elite, you seem fairly weak." The woman grinned. "That's because I'm a Fuinjutsu specialist." Kakashi's eyes widened as he quickly looked down at the suddenly fizzing pieces of paper attached to his forearms and shins. He jumped at her just as they exploded. With Mito Guy, the green-clad Junin took the Goken stance he was so well known for as his foe took the stance he recognized as Suna's signature, Kei's Subaku, the desert wind taijutsu style. Guy couldn't stop his scowl. The desert wind was very fast, and very versatile, but lacked serious defense. It instead focused on dodging. "I see you recognize my taijutsu," said the man in a deep voice. His face, arms, and bare torso were covered in different scars, which he displayed proudly. "The marks of a warrior. I feel it only fair to inform you that I was the foremost expert of the Kei's Subaku in Suna. Yosh, then we shall meet as fellow warriors. Let our flames of youth burn brightly." The 2 men rushed each other. Guy whirled around, extending his leg. Leaf Hurricane. His opponent ducked and brought his arms to the extended limb in a vicious cross-chop. Guy felt something shift as he landed with a grunt. "I just fractured your tibia. Best you surrender now, before you make it worse," the man said, with deceptive amounts of a warrior's concern in his eyes. Guy just smiled. "You would have fractured my tibia," he said as he lifted his leg and slipped off his orange leg warmer. The now revealed weight was cracked and sitting awkwardly. Guy removed it and then repeated the process with his right leg. He stood there, holding the weights in his hands. The nuke nin scowled. "I failed to see why a couple of weights will make any difference." In answer, Guy threw said weights at his foe, who, expecting something like 30 pounds, reached out to catch them, so as to redirect them out of his way. He realized his mistake as soon as the clothed metal touched his hands and kept moving, ignoring the resistance he put into the attempted capture. He screamed in pain as gravity caught the massive weight and pinned his arms to the ground, crushing both appendages under their pressure. Some remote section of his mind, unnoticed, noted that the weight that would be required would mean Guy was so insanely strong, he could crack the continent with a single punch. Konoha's handsome blue beast walked over and looked down at the screaming man. He felt genuinely sad. It seemed this man that was the same as one Rock Lee, an academy student he was hoping to mentor in 2 years. The man's chakra system was fucked. What caused the damage to your chakra? He asked quietly. It seemed he would receive no answer, but the man gradually stopped howling, shock setting in. I was hit by such a powerful combination of lightning chakra and poison that it irreparably shattered my system. It happened in the academy. I decided to focus on taijutsu, it seemed the only option. Guy's response was interrupted by a large explosion and metal chunks digging into his skull. With Naruto, the 3 outlaws converged on Naruto as he charged them. The leader was using a tanto, the other man a katana, and the woman was using bladed chains tied around her forearms. Naruto pulled his own tanto from a seal he had painted on his shoulder. He moved through a furious sequence of blocks and deflections. Even still, he felt shallow cuts and slashes litter his arms and torso, slowly shredding his dark orange hoodie. He ignored the wounds to attempt to turn the tide of the battle. He saw a risky plan form, but it was his only option. He let one of the chains slip inside his guard. The woman let out a victorious shout, thinking she had managed to seriously injure the blonde. He smiled. Should have aimed to kill, bitch. He snapped his blade into a link in the chain, right behind the blade, and stopped it cold. When the kunoichi tried pulling her weapon back, he angled his tanto up and yanked with all his strength. She stumbled off balance, and he bolted forward, spinning into a roundhouse kick that connected with her rib cage. He heard several loud cracks, and the woman cried out in pain. He landed, rolled, and came up right inside the katana wielder's guard, stabbing furiously. He poked several large holes into the man's stomach, causing him to begin wheezing as he fell over. Naruto turned to the final enemy, growing his chakra cloak to 2 tails. The Nukenin narrowed his eyes and hissed in anger. Those were my friends, and you kidnapped my cousin, invaded my village, and are trying to kill me to capture a Biju. So who is in the wrong? It's the same argument we have with Iwa about the war and the Yondaime. The man growled and leveled his tanto. Speaking of your Yondaime, you bear a remarkable resemblance. Naruto said nothing as he ran at the man, only to be stopped by an explosion that blew him off his feet. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.